fifth in the top 25 and 1 behind Kansas, UConn, Purdue, and Marquette, assuming, of course, that UConn brings back Andre Jackson, Tristan Newton, Purdue brings back Zach Edey, Marquette brings back every relevant player. Obviously, if those rosters, the projections change, then I'll change with them. But for now, I've got Duke ranked fifth. Regardless, there are some people, if not lots of people, insisting that the Blue Devils should now be the preseason number one based on them returning the top four scores from a team that went 10-1 in its final 11 games and finished 18th at KenPom. So let me start here, dead leg. Where are you at on Duke? Preseason number one, clear cut, or maybe not?
No, not clear cut. I actually hope we're headed toward, can we get to an October where we have actual, like, interesting disagreement over who should be the number one team? We get that some off seasons, don't get me wrong, but between Kansas, Connecticut, wait on Purdue with Edey, if he's back, they'll have a case. Duke, Marquette returning as much as it's returning. I think those are the teams I think that are in your top five in some sort of order. I think those are the five realistically in the conversation. It'd be wonderful, frankly, if you had one. Borzello had a different, the AP top 25 had one, KenPom had a different one. Just, pick your top 7, 8, 9 different kind of preseason polls, rankings, whatever. And if we got some good disagreement there, and if we had a lack of groupthink. So I think there's a case. Now, Roach returning, as you mentioned, it's not surprising. There is a case, though, with Flipback in particular, because he could wind up being the player of the year. He'll be on that list of 5 to 10 most likely candidates to do so. Roach returning, and considering the position he plays, I think that's really important. Proctor, I think, should have the type of season where if he really grows as a sophomore, Tyrese Proctor being like a top 20 pick next year would not stun me, because I think he does have that kind of ceiling. And then Mark Mitchell's back as well. It's also it's a big development for Duke in that they are returning. They're returning 4 starters from the season before, which brings me, before we get your thoughts on this, I have a trivia time for you.
Okay, let's go.
All right, here we go. So Duke is going to return 4 starters year over year. That does not happen often. Trivia time.
Okay.
When's the last time, year to year, that Duke returned at least 4 starters?
I'm going to say it would be Grayson Allen's junior year.
It was not Grayson Allen's junior year, but let's look up Grayson Allen's junior year real quick.
Should have been Grayson Allen's junior year.
Grayson Allen's junior year. Grayson Allen going into his junior year or going into his senior year? Like, what's the
going into his junior year?
All right, going into Grayson Allen's junior year, he came back. That team had freshman Jason Tatum on it. It had sophomore Luke Kennard. It had freshman Frank Jackson. Had senior Emil Jefferson. Had senior Matt Jones. Did not have 4 returning starters. You want one more guess?
I do want one more guess. It'll be the year that Nolan Smith came back after winning a national championship.
You are close, but if literally the head coach of Duke men's basketball is to be believed, because he is the source of this information, because I asked him, he said, John Shire texted me and said the last time it happened was 2009-2010 national championship winning Duke team. Lance Thomas, Kyle Singler, Nolan Smith, and Shire all returned, and then Brian Zubek and Lance Thomas, they both started Zubek started 17 games, Thomas started 16, so it's like 6 and 1/2 dozen, whoever you're picking. According to Shire, 2009-10 was the last time a Duke team brought back at least 4 starters. That Duke team won the national championship. Of course, it was coached by Krzyzewski, not Shire, who was on the roster there. So we'll see. There's a case to make them the preseason number 1 team, but I do take into account that he's in year 2 of this, and last year, he was given, appropriate grace period. There were real expectations, don't get me wrong, but it was also, okay, let's see how this thing's going to go with John Shire, with these freshmen that are coming in. Yeah, they had Roach who returned, which was big, but they had a talented recruiting class, but it was a young team, and then they faced a lot of injuries. Now, you are going to have a team that will have Final Four expectations, be picked to win the ACC, and it's going to have this temperature in the air of like, okay, now we're back to how it was for, 80% of the existence we had under Mike Krzyzewski. There will be like real pressure with that. I don't anticipate any kind of like UNC type 23-24 season for Duke with what UNC just did. I don't think that's coming, but I don't put it out of the realm of possibility that with that much pressure and anticipation, and now it's like, oh, Shire didn't suck in year one. Now this team's automatically going to be a top 5 team in the country. We have to allow for some variance and possibilities that just because you have all these guys returning doesn't necessarily ensure you to be one of the 3 or 4 or 5 best teams in the country. That being said, I wouldn't put them number 1, but they are inarguably like top 5 conversation heading in because of the talent, what they have coming in, and the proven experience. And Roach running that offense, I think, will be pretty key.
To your point, returning 4 guys like this, I guess guarantees nothing, but boy, it's a great place to start.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great place to start. You got 4 guys who all averaged at least 9 points per game last season for a team that, again, dealt with injuries and other things early in the season, but eventually got good. They got legitimately good. They were 10-1 in their final 11 games, finished 18th at Ken Pop. So I don't have any issue with anybody ranking them number 1. I actually think that we will probably get to a preseason AP poll that's got 3 or 4, maybe even 5 different teams getting first place votes. Yeah. I think we could have put that to rest if Mackenzie Mbako would have picked Kansas. I think at that point, pretty much everybody would have gone Kansas number 1. We'll get to Mbako later. But I still have Kansas number 1. I think you can reasonably take Kansas, UConn, Purdue, Marquette, and Duke and put them in pretty much any order. And so I know you might go, okay, some people have Duke number 1 and you got a number 5, but like, I don't think there's much difference between these schools. And the only ones I have above Duke right now are schools with either a coach who is consistently awesome or a roster that has already a projected roster that has already proven to be awesome. So let's just run through it real quick. Kansas, I've got number 1. I believe KU right now has one of the best rosters in America and the best coach. That's a great combination. Jayhawks have been a number 1 seed in 10 of the past 16 NCAA tournaments. I'm going to trust them to be awesome again. So that's one of the teams I got ahead of Duke. The next one, UConn. And that's based on them returning 4 of the top 6 scorers from a national championship team and then adding a top 5 recruiting class. That's easy to understand.
But not there yet. That's just so people are clear.
Yeah. We're still waiting on, I believe, a couple of decisions, right?
Yeah.
I'm projecting Jackson Newton back. If one of them or both of them stay in the draft, I'll adjust. I'm already up to version 12.0. I can get to 13 just like that. Just give me 20 minutes. I can update this. It's no big problem. So if UConn's projected roster looks different than I'm projecting it right now, then Duke will move ahead of them. I promise you. But for now, based on that projection, nothing crazy about having UConn slightly ahead of them. Purdue. I've got Purdue projected right now to return 6 of the top 7 scores, including Zach Edey, from a team that won the Big Ten and the Big Ten tournament and secured a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. I know how it ended, but I know how it ended. Enough of you have tweeted me to remind me how it ended.
Not going to stop. I know.
But I'm just not going to overreact to one bad game.
I hear you.
That team was great they weren't great all year. They were great at the beginning, and then they got a little bit like that. But they were a 1 seed that won the Big Ten and the Big Ten tournament. They're expecting them to be really good again is not crazy. And then Marquette, basically returning everybody from a team that won the Big East tournament, had a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament. So those are the only 4 teams I have currently projected ahead of Duke, and they're all proven. Bill Self proven, UConn's projected roster proven, Purdue's projected roster proven, Marquette's projected roster proven. But again, if you want to start Duke at number 1, totally okay with me because I see it. I understand it. They will probably start those 4 guys that I mentioned, Filipowski, Roach, Proctor, Mitchell, all of whom averaged at least 9 points per game last season. And then they got a 5-star freshman, Jared McCain, who probably slides right into that starting lineup. And boy, you've got a nice mixture of legitimate NBA talent and guys who have already been through it, who are experienced. And that is whether you take 2015 Duke, 2012 Kentucky, everybody remembers the one and dones. But as a point I've made a million times, 3 of the top 6 scores on each of those teams were non-freshmen. this Duke team is going to have the 5-star freshmen and they're going to have the NBA talent, but they're going to be relying on guys who are, in many cases in their second, third, fourth year of college. And that's what John's got available to him right now is the recipe for winning a national championship.
If Proctor actually makes the jump, man, then that's where I think things really change for Duke. Because I expect Roach to be what he's been, maybe a notch better, but he's been pretty good, and he should improve. And having his leadership, to have this is how it was for so long, as you well know, GP. But to have a high level, anywhere from top 10 to top 30 high school prospect last in a good way for 4 years in college, coaches will take that every single time. Duke gets that with Roach. Flip outperformed expectations, and then Mitchell. There's just so much promise here. And by the way, they bring back Ryan Young, who was like one of the 3 most important players for the first 12 games of Duke season last season. Jalen Blakes is back, and he'll be like a role player. But you mentioned McCain. They're going to have an overload of guards here. So Sean Stewart is a top 20 guy. He'll get minutes. TJ Power is a top 20 level kind of guy. You would think, come in and, depending on how they deploy Young, like he can just get spot minutes for Mitchell or Flip. And then Caleb Foster is the only 4-star guy here in the mix there. We'll see actually how liberal Shire wants to get with his minutes, because he will not be hurting for bodies here. They're actually they appear now. Look up on Valentine's Day and we'll see how many guys are actually logging 15 plus minutes per game. But the roster itself is pretty deep overall, and appears to be. What's interesting is it appears to have all the spots that you'd want, but and the bigs will be productive. But between Proctor, Roach, Blake, even like Jaden Shutt comes back. He didn't play, but is he going to increase there? Then you've got Stewart, McCain, Foster. You've got a lot of guards and wings there. So I would anticipate a lot of 3-guard looks. In fact, probably all the time, to be honest with what they have here. They'll run nothing but 3-guard looks, and then a couple of bigs there. And yeah, Duke is back. It never left, but here we go.
Let's go.
So we were actually talking about this on the Gary Parrish show earlier, and I asked my producer, who's like a casual college basketball fan, I was like, hey, do people still hate Duke? When I'm telling you Duke might be preseason number 1, do you go, God, I hate them? Or is that done? Did that die with Mike Krzyzewski retiring? And he said, no, he still hates Duke.
Yeah, it's still out there.
It's still out there. I like Duke. Yeah. Great academic institution.
Come on, Duke.
Smart young head coach. I like Blue. I don't hate Duke. Does that put me in the minority? I'm fine with Duke.
No, just it's constantly polarizing. It is what it is. Now, with Krzyzewski leaving, it's not what it once was. But there's always going to be an element of that there, and that's ultimately obviously good for college basketball. We want to have programs that represent a villain, even if John Shire does not look the role of a villain,
or act the role of a villain,
or anything. But it is.
He does all his own halftime interviews.
How about that?
All his halftime interviews. He's just like I tell people all the time. Like if you knew John Shire, you would like him. He's likable. He's a likable guy. Got a beautiful family. I love Duke. In fact, I want to establish. It's not that I don't hate Duke. I love Duke.
All right, there we go.
Hit me that button. Hit me a button.
Well, I got a lot here.
Defense. Come on, Duke.
That's
Let's
the one.
Go.
Yeah, I got 4 of them loaded.
Let's go, Duke. Come on.
Yeah. Unbelievable. No, I think it is good for the sport though to have Duke be, near the top of the polls and have fans root against something, some sort of monolith there. Sometimes it's Kentucky, sometimes it's Duke. That's usually the 2 programs, but Indiana can get in there sometimes, and maybe they're just working their way back because they just picked up a player that decommitted, wouldn't you know, from Duke. So nice little plot twist there, huh, GP?